They called it the soft underbelly of Europe, but there was nothing soft about it. In the burning heart of North Africa, where the sun turned metal into molten fire and sand buried men like graves, two armies clashed for control of an empire. No cities, no forests, no mercy, just endless dunes and death. Here, tanks burned under the desert sky. Soldiers died not only from bullets, but from thirst, heat, and madness. And in this vast emptiness, one name became legend: Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. But legends die too. And in the end, the desert doesn't take sides. It just takes everything. It was 1941. The war in Europe was raging. France had fallen, Britain stood alone, and Hitler's eyes were turning south. Mussolini, eager to prove that Italy was more than a shadow of its German ally, had invaded Egypt from Libya months earlier. But the Italian army was no match for the British Commonwealth forces. From Cairo, General Archibald Wavell launched Operation Compass, a lightning counterattack that shattered the Italian 10th Army, capturing over 130,000 prisoners in just 2 months. It should have been the end of the campaign, but Hitler would not allow it. He sent one man, one of his best, to save the collapsing front. His name was Erwin Rommel. When Rommel arrived in Tripoli in February 1941, he found chaos. The Italian soldiers were demoralized, equipment scarce, and supplies thin. But Rommel was not a man who waited for orders. With his Afrika Korps, a mix of elite panzer divisions and battered Italian units, he struck fast. Using speed, deception, and aggression, he did what few generals dared. He attacked when he should have defended. By April, he had driven the British all the way back to the Egyptian border. His enemies began to whisper his name with both respect and fear. He became the Desert Fox, unpredictable, cunning, almost mythical. The North African campaign was unlike any other theater of World War II. Temperatures soared to 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Engines overheated. Guns jammed from the fine desert sand. Men carried more water than ammunition. And still, it was never enough. The wind could erase entire tracks in minutes. Compass readings twisted in the magnetic heat. Soldiers spoke of mirages, lakes that weren't there, oases that vanished. But Rommel thrived in this chaos. He turned mobility into a weapon, striking from unexpected directions, hitting hard, vanishing into the dunes. His command car, Greif, raced across the desert as if guided by instinct. He often led from the front, binoculars in hand, ignoring sniper fire. To his men, he was more than a general. He was a force of nature. On the other side stood the British Eighth Army, a coalition of soldiers from across the empire: Britons, Australians, Indians, South Africans, New Zealanders, all fighting in a land that none of them called home. They respected Rommel, even as they feared him. To them, he was the enemy they could admire. But admiration didn't win battles. General Claude Auchinleck replaced Wavell after a string of defeats. He reorganized, reinforced, and prepared for a counterattack. The battle for North Africa would soon reach a boiling point. And between the two armies lay a place that would become a symbol of the entire desert war: Tobruk. Tobruk, a small port on the Libyan coast. To most, it was a meaningless patch of sand and rock. To the soldiers trapped inside it, it became hell. When Rommel surrounded Tobruk in April 1941, he expected to take it in days. But the Australian 9th Division had other plans. Under constant bombardment, with limited food and water, they held. For 8 long months, Tobruk refused to fall. The men were called the Rats of Tobruk, and they wore the name with pride. Their defense stalled Rommel's momentum and bought Britain precious time. Inside the bunkers, soldiers joked about the desert fox while patching up their wounds. But outside, the sands ran red with blood. By the end of 1941, both sides were exhausted. The war in the desert had become a deadly stalemate, back and forth, victory and defeat, over the same scorched ground. But in 1942, a new commander would arrive for the Allies, a man who would change everything, Bernard Montgomery. And the desert would soon witness its deadliest clash yet, El Alamein. The desert, once a place of ancient silence, would again echo with the roar of tanks and the cries of dying men. The forgotten front was about to decide the fate of the war. The desert had gone quiet again. The winds whispered over dunes filled with burned-out tanks, German, British, Italian. No flags, no victors, only wrecks. And in that silence, both armies knew the storm was coming back. For a year, the North African campaign had dragged on like a deadly dance. Advance, retreat, repeat. But 1942 would change everything. The fate of the desert and of the war itself would soon rest on one battlefield, El Alamein. In August 1942, the British High Command sent a new man to North Africa. His name was Bernard Montgomery. Short, sharp, and strict, the complete opposite of Rommel. Where Rommel relied on instinct, Montgomery relied on planning. Where Rommel was daring, Montgomery was disciplined. He told his men one thing: we will fight, we will win, and we will not retreat. Under Montgomery, the 8th Army was reborn. Fresh American tanks, M4 Shermans, arrived through the Suez Canal. Supplies flowed, morale rose, and a sense of purpose returned. Meanwhile, Rommel, exhausted, ill, and starved of fuel, was struggling. Hitler had turned his attention to the Eastern Front, leaving his desert fox to fight on scraps. The hunter was becoming the hunted. By October 1942, both armies stood face to face along a narrow strip of desert near the small railway stop called El Alamein. To the north lay the Mediterranean Sea. To the south, the vast, impassable Qatar Depression. There would be no flanking maneuvers, no retreats, only one way to go, straight forward. Rommel had around 100,000 men and 500 tanks. Montgomery had nearly twice that. But numbers alone don't win wars. The desert had proven that again and again. As the soldiers prepared, they could feel the tension in the air, the stillness before the storm. Some prayed. Others wrote letters home. And many wondered if they would live to see another sunrise. On the night of October 23rd, 1942, the desert exploded. At exactly 21:40, over 800 British guns opened fire simultaneously, a wall of sound that rolled through the dunes like thunder. Operation Lightfoot had begun. The British infantry advanced under a canopy of tracer fire, moving through dense minefields the Germans called the Devil's Gardens. Every step could mean death. Every explosion lit up the night like lightning. Rommel, away in Europe due to illness, was rushed back to North Africa when he heard the news. He found his army battered, outgunned, and surrounded. For the first time, the Desert Fox realized the desert was no longer his. The fighting raged for days. German and Italian divisions fought with desperate courage, but they were being crushed by the relentless weight of Allied armor. By November 4th, Rommel knew it was over. He asked Hitler for permission to retreat. The answer came back: stand fast. Rommel ignored him. The retreat from El Alamein was a nightmare. Vehicles broke down, fuel ran out, and soldiers stumbled across the endless sands, chased by British tanks and bombers. Rommel did everything he could to save his men. He commanded from the front once again, driving through chaos, shouting orders, dragging wounded soldiers into his own car. But it was hopeless. The Afrika Korps once feared and unstoppable, was dying. By the time they reached Tunisia, only a fraction remained. In May 1943, after more than 2 years of brutal desert warfare, the last Axis forces in North Africa surrendered. For Rommel, it was the beginning of the end. For Montgomery, it was his greatest victory. And for the desert, it was just another day. The North African campaign was over, but its legacy was carved deep into the sand. Over 250,000 Axis soldiers were captured. Tens of thousands more, from both sides, lay buried beneath the dunes. For the survivors, the desert would never leave them. Years later, veterans described waking at night, tasting sand in their mouths, hearing the hum of flies over burned tanks. It wasn't just a battlefield, it was a graveyard. Rommel was recalled to Europe, where he would later face impossible choices and a tragic end. Montgomery went on to lead Allied forces in Europe, from Normandy to Germany itself. But the war they fought in North Africa remained different, purer, almost ancient. No civilians, no cities, no ideology, just men, machines, and the desert. The Sahara didn't care who was right or wrong. It swallowed empires as easily as it swallowed footprints. And when the guns finally fell silent, the wind began its eternal work, covering the scars, erasing the memories, leaving only silence. The Forgotten Front, the war of mirages and dust, a place where men became legends and legends became ghosts. The desert remembers nothing, but for those who fought there, it will never be forgotten.